Here's my death experience, which led to nightmares that would haunt me for the next 24 years. This search has led me to become an unconscious mind coach and mental health hypnotherapist today. I was an Australian Navy clearance diver, SEAL team equivalent, working with the Australian Special Air Service Regiment, SAS. I drowned in the Antarctic Ocean at 2 a.m. in 17-meter seas. After coming back, I suffered hypothermia. The next day, about 6 HRS later, I jumped onto a Sea King helicopter and continued our mission. We were boarding illegal vessels in Antarctic waters. It was almost as if nothing happened because that's how we were trained. It wasn't until around 12 years later that I started getting struck down with uncontrollable panic attacks. Small things triggered my mind, so my body began going through the same intense panic that occurred 12 years ago. I experienced the moment of no return in the blackness of the freezing Antarctic waters. It was actually so cold that when the waves struck the hull of the ship, the water instantly froze. It looked like it was snowing upwards as the frosted water smashed over the top of the frigate, a type of warship. The time was approximately 2 a.m. in the morning and it was pitch black. The seas, I am told, were around 17 meters high. They were higher than the frigate itself, and you could see the ship vanish behind the waves. The Navy frigate was like a cork bobbing around in the unforgiving ocean. On my night to remember, we were fast roping off the bridge deck of an Australian frigate into a rigid inflatable boat, rib, that was being towed alongside the frigate after being lowered into the water. The fast rope is a thick rope, approximately 10 cm thick, and it actually guides you very quickly out of a helicopter or into a boat being towed alongside a ship. This way we didn't have to climb down a ladder, and it is a much faster way to load soldiers. However, due to the rope being wet and frosted with the cold, we were unable to actually stop midway down. So we just fell controllably downwards. The first load of our military assault group had all plunged down the rope into the first rib and had unhooked the shackle at the front of the boat which was towing them alongside the frigate. They then proceeded to the rear of the ship and followed behind until the second rib had been loaded. We were all going to the illegal vessel under the cover of darkness and the massive sea swell. As luck would have it, I was actually the first assault team member to plummet down the fast rope into the second inflatable boat being towed alongside the frigate. I looked down the side of the ship from the bridge deck and saw that approximately 30 feet below, the boat had come alongside. The bowman, the fellow at the front, was raising his thumb to signal that he had hooked up the shackle to the rope and was now being towed alongside the frigate. At that moment, I climbed over the rails, grabbed the thick, fast rope, and plummeted down it towards the inflatable boat alongside. It's also important to note that I was wearing a full thermal snowsuit, snow boots, a backpack containing 3 days' rations, a sledgehammer to beat in locked doors on any illegal vessel to gain entry, plus firearms, weapons, and ammunition as needed should we be met with resistance on board the vessel we were about to board. I was halfway down the rope when a huge wave crashes against the hull of the Navy frigate. The inflatable boat was pushed away from the hull, and the shackle at the front of the rib snapped, causing the rib to slip backwards and outwards from the frigate's hull. I slid into the Antarctic Ocean, hanging onto the thick rope as the frigate is going about 10 knots, 10 miles per hour. I look over my left shoulder and see that the driver of the rib is now driving it alongside the ship, keeping up with it just so the bow, front of the rib, is about an arm's length from me as I'm being bashed against the hull of the ship and being dragged through the sea swell. In short, I was being towed alongside the ship at about 10 knots and hanging onto the rope in freezing conditions with all my equipment on. The bowman was screaming at me to grab a hold of the thin ropes on the top of the rib, so I reached out and grabbed a hold of the thin ropes around the inflatable. This meant I was dragging under the rib at the same speed of about 10 knots. The bowman was yelling at me to not let go, but I couldn't hang on. I was sucked under the water. The water was so cold that when my head went under, I gasped and ended up inhaling a lot of water, which froze my throat. I popped up to the surface as I was being sucked into the hull of the frigate. I looked up and saw other military personnel running along the deck of the ship yelling out, "Man overboard, man overboard." I kept pushing myself out from the hull of the ship as my main concern was being sucked under the ship. The wake of the ship kept sucking me into the side of the hull. I looked down the length of the ship and saw the foaming fury of the waves being made by the propellers of the ship. A massive panic came over me as I thought I was going to be chopped up by the huge propellers that rotated in towards the center of the ship as it pushed through the water. When the foaming waves at the stern, back of the ship reached me, I got sucked under the ship. This sent me to the middle of the hull where I kicked and screamed in absolute, uncontrollable panic. I felt my right boot connect with the hard hull of the ship, so I pushed out with all my strength, and luckily I popped out the back of the surging waves and saw the ship sailing away in the darkness. I recall absolute relief as I watched the ship sail away as I hadn't been chopped up by the propellers. It was then that I heard the first inflatable boat's crew yelling that they could see me in the darkness. My snowsuit was bright orange. They were yelling that they were coming to pick me up. I looked around and saw the boat surfing down a wave, totally out of control and towards me. The boat ran straight over me, smashing into my head and forcing me under the water. Again, I panicked and thrust my arms and legs as hard as I could towards the surface and began treading water in the freezing ocean. When I got to the surface, I then heard the crew of the second inflatable boat yelling out to me that they would grab me and pick me up. I looked around in the darkness and saw them. The same as the first boat, they were surfing uncontrollably down the huge waves, and they also ran over me, striking my head and arms. This forced me under the water again, where I was really starting to struggle to get back up to the surface. I continued thrashing around to get back up to the surface of the water. But by now, the cold water, the weight of my snowsuit and my weighted backpack, was making it harder and harder to get back up to the surface. My body was beginning to go into shock as my blood started concentrating on my organs instead of pushing it out to my arms and legs. I was now drifting downwards into the black ocean, which felt as if it was freezing my eyeballs and my throat as I gulped down more and more water into my lungs. The panic was something that is hard to describe. My body went into a severe fight mode to stay alive. I kept my eyes open as I continued sinking as I stared into the blackness. I also kept inhaling the freezing water and remembered everything slowly turning from extreme cold to becoming really warm inside me. It was as if the blackness began covering me like a warm blanket. I still remember the total calmness that came over me as I kept inhaling the blackness all around, which now also began to feel as it was filling me up from the inside. I actually felt as I was drifting off into a lovely deep sleep. It was as if a thick black liquid began to cover my eyes and was slowly making its way around the outside of my body and the inside of my brain. I began feeling like I was actually flying in the blackness, with a calmness and peacefulness becoming my entire existence. I began the transition from my body's physical mass into nothingness, but there was also an amazing, home-like welcoming feeling of being loved. I felt surrounded by people who loved me and that I also loved, but they were people I actually didn't know in this life. What happened next was nothing short of incredible. The first rib's crew had seen me go under, so maneuvered the boat over me in the massive sea swell. The crew then formed a human chain of 3 personnel into the water, and one of the crew thrashed around in the blackness of the ocean and miraculously grabbed my right arm as I was drifting down into the blackness. They then pulled me back into the boat and onto the deck floor, where I came back to consciousness and began coughing up all the water I had inhaled and swallowed. It was as if time had stopped over the last 10 minutes and everything felt as it was going normal. It was as if what I'd gone through didn't even happen. I actually felt an incredible clarity of everything around me. It was as if the black sky separated from the black water and all the colors seemed in the highest definition. It's very important for a person who has been subjected to severe cold to stay still, so the warmth their body generates by moving their limbs is kept around their vital organs. However, there I am standing up yelling at everyone, "Come on, let's go and get this illegal boat." The call came back from the Navy frigate to get me back on board to see if I had been injured in the event. I was put back on my original rib and taken back on board the frigate. I was dressed up in my snowsuit, boots, backpack, etc. In the wardroom, while military nurses and doctors undressed me to get the cold, wet clothes off. I could feel the mood in the room was very tense as everyone was worried that I was about to go into shock from hypothermia. My body temperature was bordering on death at around 33 to 34 degrees Celsius. I blacked out and collapsed, so I was placed on my back on the carpeted floor with a plastic blanket put over me. A machine began pumping warm air into the blanket to slowly allow my blood to be distributed from around my organs to my extremities without shocking my organs. I must have transitioned again from my body into the other side, or maybe it was in between both sides. I vividly remember being surrounded by the blackness again, with so much love around me and inside of me. I remember being really confused at this time because all I could hear was the softest, beautiful, guiding voice coming from outside of the blackness. It's strange to try and remember the feeling, but it was like I was given a soft push through the darkness towards the beautiful voice which was telling me everything would be okay. I still remember that soothing, loving voice saying, "Come to me, darling, it's okay. Come to me over here." The voice kept saying the same thing over and over for what I thought may have been about 15 to 20 times. I began feeling a soft, warm hand holding mine with another warm hand stroking the top on my hand as I slowly began drifting back into self-consciousness. The lovely voice from the blackness in my mind then sort of transported into reality. A female officer who was sitting next to me on the floor was saying, "It's all okay now. Come here and wake up now. It's time to wake up." My vital signs had started getting stronger, and after what seemed many hours had gotten back to normal. 6 hours later, we were boarding another vessel as if nothing had happened. This story was shared by Gregory K. and happened in the late 1990s.